Dungeons & Dragons, a game almost as old as my parents, came out in 1974 and is the basis of the 2023 Game of the Year Baldur's Gate 3. And if that does not answer the reason why this game is the greatest of all time, I don't know what more you need me to say. In the modern gaming world, it isn't often that you get a game that lives for more than a few weeks, especially if it isn't competitive and multiplayer. But Baldur's Gate truly reminds us what good games are supposed to be in 2023, so without spoiling too much, what is it all about? Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based RPG that takes place in the world of Faerun. The player starts the game aboard a nautiloid ship controlled by mind flayers after a tadpole is inserted into the protagonist's heads. Once agency is realized, they manage to find an escape after a Githyanki attack, causing the ship to crash and start the game on a beach in the Sword Coast. As for how combat functions, it shares many similarities with the D&D 5e Player's Handbook, but has some slightly modified rules that are made for better balance. For example, in D&D 5e, you aren't supposed to be able to throw potions on the ground to heal allies, but that is a thing in this game which provides a lot of versatility and also allows for some fights to be absolutely insane later on in the game. Onward to the story though, Baldur's Gate 3 is a fantasy tale about a band of adventurers that are unwillingly thrusted into a position of incredible importance against different parties harnessing powers of several deities. Because of this, the player is always questioning who to trust, as every companion along the way has their own personal motives, only to later learn that the only people they can really trust is themselves in order to save themselves from illithid control and consequently the world. Circling back to the gameplay, to me, the best way to explain this is by splitting it up into two different categories, interacting with the environment and how the combat then fits into that. Before we do that though, it would be wrong to discuss without explaining all of the classes you have to choose from. There are 12 classes, each with their own sets of powerful subclasses ranging from vengeful paladins to devilish warlocks. There are so many races on top of that to choose from that each give their own passive benefits and unreal amounts of customization options. If there is a character that you want to make, trust me, it's possible. Usually when running through a game, I'm heavily interested in the combat and the mechanics it brings, but Baldur's Gate does an excellent job of providing the player with agency to interact with the environment, which is what makes the deep levels of roleplay actually interesting to a normie like me, all things considered. The world in one playthrough is likely to be vastly different compared to the world in another based on the decisions you make, the party you choose to form, and whether you are playing with a group of friends or not. Hell, you could throw that all out the door and go through the game solo by telling your companions to kick rocks if you really want to do that. Herein lies the heart of what people think makes Baldur's Gate 3 so successful. Endless possibilities of content. But what I really think it is, the agency of choice that no other game brings. True open world freedom. By giving this power to the player, it makes the environment more immersive and alive than any other game, more so than it already does through the visual and audio design. Aside from roleplay though, almost everything can be interacted with. Want to lockpick a chest but it's too hard or you don't have the tools? Just smash it with your character that doesn't speak English but has a high strength stat. Don't want to talk to an NPC? Just kill him. Don't want to fight a boss? Well, don't. Or just make them kill themselves. The possibilities are endless. On the topics of combat though, this game does a really good job of keeping it interesting. With most RPGs, it gets really repetitive. You find one strategy that works and you just kind of run with it. But with 4 different difficulties and hundreds of spells, cantrips, and skills to utilize within combat, the amount of agency you have even within the build you make is incredible. What really stands out to me, however, is how well the developers force the player to be versatile and outsmart the combat they are given to overcome the challenge. Let's look at 2 spells for example, Sleet Storm and Ice Storm. At face value, it looks as though Ice Storm is just a complete upgrade. It is a higher level, creates the same icy ground effect, and doesn't require concentration on top of doing damage. What I love, however, is that even if these are some clear benefits, Sleet Storm is still a viable spell to pick up, as there are specific combats where it is better to have 10 turns of consistent AoE freeze ability on the ground to help crowd control the enemies you simply won't be able to burst down fast enough. It also has a chance to remove concentration, which really helps with holding down and defending objectives too. Building on this, I find it really fun that there are so many different combos that work better depending on the situation as well. For example, in my Tactician playthrough, the hardest of the base difficulties, I primarily play to wet blast most difficult encounters against bosses, as wet targets take double damage to electric and ice damage. This really helps me melt bosses even when they have incredible amounts of health. However, it can be really expensive and difficult to pull off unless the targets stay put or manage to run through it. This means I have to have a secondary combo for encounters with swarms of enemies, and I have to build my characters accordingly. To counteract this, I chose to pick up a spell that allows me to summon a minion that can cast spikes onto the ground, and another spell that allows my casters to conjure clouds of daggers, blocking off choke points and forcing targets to incur damage in order to push me. The reality is that I have put over 100 hours into this game and still love the combat every time I am faced with it, no matter the engagement, which is really important to me because that is typically what I play games for. It is remarkable. The thing is, what good is an immersive environment and, well, an RPG if it's not without its visual and audio design? At this point though, if you want to avoid spoilers of Act 1 or Act 2, I highly recommend you either click off the video or skip to the end for the final rating. The sensory design is what brings out the story of the game, which makes it very difficult to not spoil. Alright, let's get into it. Aside from the music of the game being incredible standalone, the thematic representation is what allows it to transcend to being one of the most incredible soundtracks of all time. Every track has such emotion behind it, even from the beginning of the game. Early when finding a cure for the tadpole, the track I Want to Live begins with a repeated note, representing a clock ticking, much like of that of the ticking time bomb waiting to explode that is the Illithid. The Illithid tadpole is but moments away from activating and transforming the player into a mind flayer the entire game, and this song only reminds you that it is only so long before you are transformed for good. Moving on to the combat, the song matches the environment and even reacts to critical moments in the combat when bosses die, shifting seamlessly into a trumpet motif that absolutely pumps me up. The fight that stuck out to me the most so far in the game has to be the series of fights with Ketheric Thorm. In terms of the lore, the entire story leading up to your conflict with him has been pretty focused. Assault Moonrise Towers, kill Thorm, and everything will be okay again. In the first fight, however, it doesn't quite feel clear. There are still so many ominous musical ideas with a gloomy environment that makes you feel as though something just isn't right. Alas, as the song goes on, it progresses through similar motifs like those of the Goblin Camp combats, Shadowlands sieges, and more. Aside from the audio though, the visuals speak for themselves too. The mountain pass is breathtaking, the Underdark is ominous, and the Shadowlands are extremely unsettling. I haven't even got to Baldur's Gate yet, but I know that that is going to be incredible as well. At the end of the day, what really decides whether a game is legendary or not comes down to whether or not it innovates on the industry. Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian Studios in general absolutely does that. Not only is the gameplay loop incredibly fresh and satisfying, it is all done with such refreshing detail that it is redefining what a good release in modern gaming truly is. All of this is done with no microtransactions, in other words, no bullshit. The story reminds you that there is no one you can truly trust but yourself, and that those that you look up to are flawed and often lead you astray. Seeing how that affects your devoted companions is also incredibly cathartic. On a deeper level though, the magic of Baldur's Gate lies within the experience of everything together. I've learned more about myself through the story of the game than I have in any other game, period. When my friends and I messed up and let Isabel get captured in the last lights in, leading us to kill the entire village, I remember the next half hour being incredibly difficult emotionally. My friends were distraught, sad at the loss of some of their favorite vendors and characters, while I was angry. I found out that in stressful and sad situations, I don't really do a great job of processing it. Instead, I find a way to avenge what I lost and don't lose sight of the perpetrator. Let's just say, killing Ketheric Thorm with my paladin for good was one of the most satisfying experiences in the game thus far. When a game drives change in the way one perceives the world, it transcends the domain of pixels on a screen. It becomes a work of art. That is why Baldur's Gate 3 is legendary and needs no further explanation. While this game truly is a gem, it is disheartening that games like these only release once in a blue moon. They take incredible amounts of effort, time, and are difficult to monetize. A game as shoddily released as Overwatch 2 made $100 million off of microtransactions in its first quarter alone and is far easier to produce and maintain. That isn't to discredit Baldur's Gate 3 though. It is a treat that we are alive to experience such an amazing work of art that will captivate us for years until the next expansion on the frontier is created. But until then, thank you all so much for watching, but until next next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in the next one.